Have you ever stared at a system, maybe a workflow, or even just, a long-standing company way of doing things and thought, is this really the best way? Do you just keep polishing it, making those tiny little improvements, hoping something big changes? Or do you get that feeling sometimes, that nagging sense that tweaking just isn't cutting it? That maybe, just maybe, you need to tear it all down and start totally fresh with a completely new plan? It's a big question for any organization, really, and it often feels like a massive gamble. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through all the noise and bring you the most valuable bits of knowledge. Today, we're diving into a concept that, well, it didn't just tweak things, it basically demanded a revolution. We're talking about business process reengineering, or BPR. It's a fascinating and, yeah, often controversial idea from business management that really shook things up back in the 1990s. And our insights today, they come straight from the sources you've shared with us, painting a picture of something pretty radical and sometimes maybe a little ruthless.
Absolutely. And our mission here really is to unpack what BPR is all about at its core. We're going to look at what made it so radical, explore the benefits it aimed for, but also, importantly, look hard at the criticisms it faced. And ultimately, we want to figure out what the lasting lessons from BPR mean for you when you're thinking about change, big or small, in any organization you might be part of or just interested in.
Okay, let's unpack this then. BPR really emerged quite dramatically in the 1990s. It was a time of intense globalization. Technology was evolving super fast. Competition was heating up. Businesses were scrambling for ways to get drastically better, more efficient, more effective. And the old ways, those small step-by-step improvements, they just weren't working for a lot of companies anymore. This wasn't just some minor update. It was actually inspired by a really groundbreaking book, one that sort of captured the moment, Reengineering the Corporation, a manifesto for business revolution. Michael Hammer and James Champy wrote it, and it wasn't like a gentle suggestion. It was more like a rallying cry,
Right.
a call to arms for businesses that felt like they were facing, well, maybe an existential crisis.
Yeah, what's really striking is just how bold the core idea was. The Hammer and Champy, the consultants back then, were pushing. They basically told companies, pretty bluntly, don't bother with incremental improvements. Instead, abolish everything, go back to the drawing board, and redesign all the business processes involved in producing something, whether a product or a service. But can you imagine the reaction of boardrooms like, what? Throw everything out.
Wow. Yeah.
It wasn't about tweaking. It was this bold mandate for a complete overhaul, a total reset, not just fiddling around the edges. So, like, if you ran customer service, instead of just, say, training your team better or getting a new phone system, BPR would say, forget how customer service works now. Just imagine the perfect outcome customer issue resolved instantly. Then design the whole process from scratch to make that happen. And you wouldn't care what departments or job roles needed to be, well, dismantled to get there.
That sounds incredibly disruptive.
Almost.
Yeah, unsettling. That's a level of change that goes way beyond just a new strategy document or the usual annual review. So what were the key characteristics, the things that really defined this radical redesign approach? It wasn't just about being different, right? It had these three specific, intense pillars.
Exactly. So the first pillar was fundamental. BPR demanded that organizations ask really basic questions, like, what is this process truly meant to achieve at its absolute core? It wasn't about how it works now or the current steps. It was about stripping away every assumption. Think of it like this. Maybe a car maker, instead of asking, how do we build cars faster on the line?
Yeah.
You'd ask, what's the fundamental point of transportation? How can we completely rethink getting someone from A to B?
Ah, okay. Going right back to the why.
Precisely. Questioning everything to uncover those hidden, maybe decades-old inefficiencies. Then the second pillar was radical. This meant, and this quote from the sources really hits it, going to the root of things and ignoring completely how things were done before, like starting again with a new sheet of paper.
A blank sheet of paper.
Right. It emphasizes not just change, but completely disregarding history. No, this is how we've always done it.
Yeah.
You weren't constrained by tradition or past practice. Every single step needed justification from that totally fresh perspective. So if your company had, say, 5 departments involved in launching a new product, a radical BPR approach would ignore those departments completely at first. It would design the ideal streamlined path for the launch, then figure out who does what. Maybe it's a whole new team structure.
Okay, fundamental, radical. What was the third one?
And finally, the third characteristic was dramatic. BPR wasn't interested in slow, steady progress or small wins. It aimed squarely at bringing about very big and sudden changes. The goal was huge, impactful results, massive cost cuts, big quality jumps, much faster delivery, and in a relatively short time, not inching forward.
High stakes then.
Exactly. High stakes, high reward. It promised revolutionary transformation, not just evolution.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? The sheer boldness needed for an organization to even consider that, to willingly ditch years, maybe decades of how things are done and just jump into the unknown with that blank sheet. I can almost picture the faces in the boardroom when Hammer first said, just throw it all out.
Yeah.
That takes real organizational courage, or maybe desperation sometimes. Now, pushing for such radical, dramatic change, it rarely comes without some major downsides, right? Especially if you're talking about demolishing everything. I imagine not everyone was thrilled. What were the main criticisms that popped up when companies actually tried
Oh,
this?
absolutely.
Yeah.
While the promise was huge transformation, the reality often involved, well, significant human costs. The number one criticism you see in the sources, and it's a big one, is that in the eyes of critics, BPR often meant delayering,
Delayering.
removing layers of management, which perhaps inevitably resulted in job losses. When you start with that blank sheet and redesign processes from the ground up, a lot of existing roles just disappear, especially for those middle management jobs that used to oversee bits and pieces of old fragmented processes in the new streamlined structure. They might seem redundant.
Ouch.
Yeah. It was a major human impact that often came with these dramatic shifts. It led to layoffs, a lot of anxiety within companies.
That does sound quite cold, almost like a purely mechanical view of business, doesn't it? If the main goal is just process efficiency, was there much room in the BPR philosophy for the people involved? Or is that sort of secondary?
Well, that raises a really important point, and it's where a lot of the criticism focuses. The very nature of BPR wanting to abolish everything and start fresh almost inevitably led to these kinds of outcomes. Critics definitely pointed out that, okay, maybe you gained efficiency, but it often came at a huge human cost, especially for the people whose jobs were cut in the name of leaner operations. And it wasn't just job losses. There was also just immense resistance to change. I mean, understandably, employees, managers who'd built their careers around specific ways of doing things, they often felt threatened, devalued.
Yeah, I can see that.
And this radical top-down way of forcing change, it could totally crush morale, lead to losing valuable knowledge built up over years, and sometimes people would actively resist or even sabotage it. In fact, many BPR projects reportedly had pretty high failure rates. Not necessarily because the ideas were bad on paper, but because organizations really struggled with the people side, the cultural side, of such massive upheaval.
So a real double-edged sword then. The promise of dramatic results versus these really tough, sometimes devastating human and organizational hurdles in actually doing it. But let's shift gears for a moment. Despite all that criticism, BPR clearly had, and maybe still has, strong supporters for a reason. For them, the radical approach wasn't the problem. It was actually its greatest strength. They offered a way to survive, to revitalize. What were the big benefits they pointed to?
Right. It's interesting because supporters saw those very intense characteristics of BPR as the drivers for real organizational excellence, especially for companies that were really struggling to keep up. For instance, BPR fostered what they called strong leadership. The idea was that changes are imposed from above, and you needed that visible commitment from leaders for change. That top-down mandate, it was seen as absolutely essential for these huge transformations to actually work, to stop them getting stuck in internal politics or resistance.
Okay, so the very thing that made it disruptive being imposed was seen as necessary almost to cut through the old ways.
Exactly. Then there was the perceived impact on people management. Now, critics focus on job losses, right? But supporters argue that fewer management layers mean larger, more challenging jobs for the employees who remained.
Interesting angle.
The thinking was, with less bureaucracy and more direct responsibility for a whole process, not just a tiny part, people would have more autonomy, a wider scope, ultimately more engaging, more fulfilling work. It was definitely a trade-off, no question. But proponents believed it led to a more empowered, maybe more skilled workforce in the end.
That does sound like it could be motivating for some people, definitely. But I can also imagine it meant a really steep learning curve and a ton of pressure for those who stayed. What about, the bigger picture, the strategy?
Yeah, that brings us to the third benefit. In terms of policy and strategy, BPR was seen to bring about a, quote, clearer fit between the organization and its declared purpose and goals. By forcing that fundamental questioning of everything, companies could strip away stuff that didn't directly help their core mission. So it helped realign their processes directly with their big strategic objectives. Made the whole organization feel more coherent, more focused on its purpose.
That's interesting. Forcing that clean slate actually helps build a deeper understanding, too. It's almost like a mandatory re-education on how the business really works or should work, not just how it did work.
Absolutely. And that links straight into the fourth benefit. The actual processes themselves got dramatically better. Managers and employees gained improved awareness and understanding of key processes. Because when you rebuild a process from zero, everyone involved gets a much deeper feel for how it flows, why it exists, how their piece connects to the whole thing. That naturally leads to better execution, better problem solving down the line.
And what about the customer? The ultimate judge of whether things are working.
Good point. There was a huge focus on customer satisfaction. A really key intended outcome was a clear focus of processes on the customer for existing products and services. By re-engineering, the goal was to streamline everything to serve customer needs, better make services faster, more responsive, more tailored. That was critical, especially as markets got more competitive and customer experience became, well, everything. And maybe the most dramatic benefit, particularly for companies really in trouble, was the potential for truly dramatic business results. BPR offered dramatic improvements for companies in crisis, for organizations maybe on the brink, facing bankruptcy, or just becoming totally irrelevant in their market. A complete overhaul wasn't just an option, it was often a necessity. BPR gave them a framework for that kind of radical turnaround. It offered a path to fundamental, almost revolutionary change when maybe smaller steps had already failed.
So what does this all really mean then? It kind of paints a picture of potentially revitalized, much more focused organizations. Companies that, if they went through BPR successfully, could come out stronger, more agile, and really deeply connected to their strategic purpose. It wasn't just about saving money. It was about totally reimagining the business to get significant, measurable improvements.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
for the people who believed in it, BPR offered a direct route to fundamental, really impactful change. And yet, while the term BPR itself might sound a bit dated now, a bit 90s, the fundamental questions it forced companies to ask, why are we doing this? Could we just start over? Those principles, they actually underpin a lot of modern transformation efforts.
Think about today's big digital transformations, or adopting agile ways of working, or even the push towards AI and automation. A lot of those initiatives, when you get down to it, have that BPR spirit. They question the old ways and look for radically new ways to operate. It's a good reminder that sometimes real progress isn't just about optimizing what you have. Sometimes it really is about reinvention.
What an incredible journey, really, through a concept that truly threw down the gauntlet to conventional business thinking. We've seen how business process reengineering burst onto the scene in the dynamic 90s, driven by those radical ideas from Hammer and Champy. Pushing for that complete overhaul, not just small tweaks, we explored its three defining pillars: fundamental, radical, and dramatic. That collective call to basically throw out the old playbook, start with that fresh sheet of paper, and aim for big, sudden changes. We also looked squarely at the serious criticisms, didn't we? Especially that very real human cost of delayering and the huge challenge of managing such massive cultural shifts. But we balanced that with the powerful benefits its supporters saw, from driving strong leadership and creating potentially more challenging roles to achieving a clearer strategic fit, better processes, happier customers, and crucially, delivering those dramatic results for companies truly in crisis.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe here's something for you to think about. How often do you find yourself somewhere on that spectrum of change, between just making small tweaks and completely reimagining things? When might having the courage to actually start with a new sheet of paper be the only real path forward for you, whether that's in your work, maybe a project, or even something personal? And what are those critical questions, the fundamental, the radical, the dramatic ones, that you'd absolutely need to ask yourself before taking such a huge and potentially transformative leap?